Hi, all. I want to welcome you and thank you for tuning in to tonight's event with psychiatrist Bandy Lee and Richard Greene. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 25th season. This is a moment of extreme anxiety, fear, and unease. We've got news fatigue, COVID isolation, and then there's that election just 3 days away. So we thought a quick check-in with an internationally renowned psychiatrist was in order. Dr. Bandy Lee has been a psychiatrist at Yale School of Medicine for 17 years and is president of the World Mental Health Coalition. In 2017, she ruffled the dusty old feathers of the American Psychiatric Association when she published The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump for putting the president on the couch when he wasn't her patient or the patient of the 37 other renowned mental health experts who contributed essays to her book. But Dr. Lee and her colleagues stand by their steadfast conviction that it is an ethical duty to warn the public when someone poses a significant danger to the nation, and in this case, to the world, conclusions based on massive evidence from the public record. In her new book, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, she explores not only Trump's sociopathy, but that of his supporting environment. Questions, here's the book, people. It's just great. In her new book, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, she explores not only Trump's sociopathy, but that of his supporting environment. Questions might come up. Feel free to email them to us at reservations@writersblockpresents.com, and we'll try to address them. Richard Greene is an attorney and an international consultant in human communications, from verbal language to body language. Richard's interests, to put it mildly, include Trump's abusive language and the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. He's a founder of 279forchange.us. He'll chat with Dr. Lee for a few minutes before we get to the great questions from you, the audience. We urge you to visit the website writersblockpresents.com for a link to Dr. Lee's book. And of course, if you like this program, please consider sending a tax-deductible contribution to Writer's Block to keep these programs going. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bandy Lee and Richard Greene.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you, Bandy, for being willing to interfere with your trick-or-treating, which I'm sure you were planning to do, and to help us understand the fearful possibilities that exist with 4 more years of Donald Trump. And even if Donald Trump loses, what might happen from November 3rd all the way to January 20. And I want to cut straight to the chase. You and I have known each other a long time. I wrote an article right after the election that you, Bandy, say was a bit of a wake-up call to you and encouraged you to get involved. It was entitled, "Is Donald Trump Mentally Ill?" It went viral. Let's just start with that question, Bandy. Is Donald Trump mentally ill?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me, Andrea and Richard. It's a pleasure to be here, and I did try to dress up a little to get in the mood of Halloween. Yes, so the question as to whether or not Donald Trump is mentally ill, I think many of us could see for ourselves that he is not normal and that he has many maladaptive, rigid and destructive traits that do point to mental pathology. But we as mental health professionals don't actually focus on mental illness, but we focus on what is called mental capacity. The reason for that is this. Mental illness does not necessarily make one incapable of doing a job. In fact, a Duke University study showed that almost half of US presidents over 200 years had some kind of mental illness. That compared to 1/5 of the general population. So there must even be an advantage to having a mental illness. So mental illness by itself does not disqualify. What is important is to measure what's actually important to public health. That is the president capable of doing his job? That's mental capacity. Is he capable of rational decision making? And also of importance is whether or not he is dangerous. And these are actually the questions we have answered and can answer from a distance, because it's a public health issue and not a clinical mental health issue where you need a personal interview.
So let's go straight to that. And thanks for the clarification. And maybe that's one of the reasons people don't like politicians, because they're a little bit off just as a group, apparently, and that is part of their success formula. I would love for you to share with us on this Halloween, a couple days before America either reelects him or sends him packing and potentially to jail. Can you give us some examples of some specific dangers that another 4 years of Donald Trump might present to ourselves, our families, our country, and the world?
Yes, well, the dangers are myriad and anywhere from adversely affecting our mental health by putting us in situations of anxiety and exhaustion, as many are feeling right now. And so I was hoping that we can also get a break from that interveningly as well. I can give some tips. But as for the dangers, well, we have a president with a dangerous psychology and severe mental pathology, as far as we can tell, and someone who definitively lacks mental capacity. We were able to do that exam in great detail with intimate information that was included in the Mueller report. So when we actually did that report in April of 2019 with a panel of the nation's top mental health experts, we knew, we did not know that there would be a pandemic, but we knew that should there be a crisis, he would disastrously mishandle it. And so that's what has happened. So what will happen in the next 4 years? We can expect more of the chaos and destruction. In fact, we can expect an acceleration of the current dangers. Everything from mounting deaths from an uncontrolled pandemic that is currently spiraling out of control. We can expect the economy plummeting to levels already as bad as the Great Depression right now, but worse. And we would perpetually be in danger, because even currently we are at the brink of danger in terms of violence, whether it be civil war, civil unrest, or international war, or even nuclear war. We have said multiple times that none of these things can be taken off the table because there are no concrete barriers.
So one of the things that's been particularly bizarre and unbelievable is to watch Joe Biden doing car rallies, wearing masks everywhere, really respecting the protocols that have been established by Dr. Fauci and even, the Trump administration itself, and to see Donald Trump flaunting them and even chastising right-wing talk show hosts like Laura Ingraham for wearing a mask, which he did yesterday. Can it be said that Donald Trump is purposely squeezing all of these human beings in close quarters without masks, without requiring masks, for his own narcissistic pleasure, and because he is in some way sadistic and actually, and I know this is a tough question, actually delights on some level with the danger and the damage he is creating even for his own supporters?
Yes, Richard, I think you're quoting me from various places if you've gotten that far. Yes, I have said, as you have noted in the past, that he shows signs of pathological narcissism, not as a diagnosis, but this is a tendency, and we know that it's severe, pathologically severe. And that means that he will not be able to consider anyone other than himself. And to buttress his own needs for an inflated sense of self, which is to compensate for feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, and powerlessness inside, that he would go to all extents. In fact, it's somewhat like an urgency where one is gasping for air. The body needs oxygen to survive, but the mind needs love to survive. And that is what he's lacking. Even the basic amount of self-love he does not have, which is why he must grasp for every opportunity for adulation, for proving himself right, declaring that he's never wrong, and even changing reality in order to make it so. So that is very dangerous, not only for the fact that he cannot tolerate reality, but that if this inflated self-image that he needs were to be challenged, he goes into rage attacks. But if there were no chance of recovering, such as the loss of an election, he may go to any extent to reap revenge on a nation that has failed him.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. In a previous interview you and I had, you told about a story about a client or a patient who had a similar diagnosis to Donald Trump, pathological narcissism, who was fired from his job, a regular job, not president of the United States. And it was so humiliating and so devastating to him, given his complete lack of self-esteem internally, that he actually went home and he killed his family and tried to kill himself. Is that accurate? Are we overblowing the potential threats?
No, that actually very well illustrates how urgent the need for acceptance and approval from others is. And so rather than face the prospect of his family criticizing him or making fun of him, that's how he would think, that his family would be against him and no longer find him worthy to be a part of the family with. And so rather than face that prospect of what he pretty much probably experienced as psychic death, he would rather kill his family and obliterate any observing eyes, and also, having lost everything, he was ready to kill himself. So we often think of pathologically narcissistic individuals, given how selfish they are, self-serving they are, and they would even put others at harm to serve themselves. We think of them as unlikely to harm themselves, but in fact, they are more likely to harm themselves and probably will bring down the entire family, if not the entire nation, with them.
So this one more question, Andrea. This is pretty scary for an average person, right, who has a family and lives in a neighborhood. How much more dangerous is this? How much more scary is this on this Halloween Eve or Halloween, when this particular person has unilateral access to 4,000 nuclear weapons?
That is right. Was that a question for Andrea?
No, it's a question for you. How much? I mean, I want to go deep into how scary this is, and that's about the scariest thing I can think of. Is that just a fantasy, or is that an actual possibility with someone who has that much power and is that has that much of an issue with this pathological narcissism?
Well, I mean, consider how much damage has already been done in terms of hundreds of thousands of deaths, a plague afflicting the country, tens of millions losing their jobs, an economy tanking for a vast majority of the population, and our stature in the world, in terms in our history of democracy, our social and political institutions, everything is our standard decorum. How much of this has been damaged and destroyed already? But imagine someone who does this in his ordinary state, and when he were to be confronted with the situation that he would fear with all his life, how little it would matter to him that the rest be destroyed. And especially if he can obliterate the observing eyes, as one might say, or the laughing eyes, which he often attributes to others and fears that he might be laughed at. And I might note that when we talk about pathological narcissism, it's not to reduce this as the only characteristic or tendency that he has. You've also mentioned sociopathy, and that's another strong tendency that he has. And part of that is actually to, first of all, to lack empathy. Both conditions lack empathy, but sociopathy in particular is the inability to feel what most people feel. And so a colleague of mine in New York calls those suffering from the condition outsiders to love. And when you see other people able to experience life and appreciate and enjoy it, that arouses a lot of envy. And so you mentioned the delight in others' suffering and death. That is very much a feeling that happens, that they actually enjoy watching others suffer. And so we can also expect that he's deliberately putting people in danger, as he does at his super spreader rallies with no precautions.
Wow, thank you. So much more to talk about. Andrea, I know you wanted to jump in. And we have a lot of questions.
We have so many questions. We've had so much engagement from the audience, people who have sent in so many terrific questions. And Bandy, I so appreciate your help. These questions are in random order. If he loses, how do we help ourselves and others get through to January inauguration?
Yes, it's going to be a scary time, and probably the most dangerous time in this presidency. Since the leaders of this country and the authorities have not placed any concrete measures for safeguarding against violence, I think the best we can do is to take care of ourselves. It seems rather paradoxical that we would choose this time to turn inward and sense our own needs and take care of them. But that's exactly what allows us to have greater outward power, creativity, generativity, and ideas, and appreciation for life, that it will help us get through challenges. So I would say to everyone, the first responsibility is to take care of ourselves.
There are a lot of therapists who have sent in questions, and basically the one that's come in so many times today and yesterday is, what do therapists tell their patients in terms of figuring things out and surviving emotionally if Trump wins? You know, if there's that.
Yes, I think, again, taking care of ourselves, making sure we get plenty of sleep and eat healthy foods and do things that we enjoy, check in with family and friends. This kind of balance, personal time and distance are actually what allow us perspective and may mobilize us in a way that could meet the challenge of the day. Now that the authorities have failed to intervene, in particular lawmakers or our institutions, including the Justice Department, we should still not forget that the greatest power lies in the people. And the people have often mobilized and turned things around in ways that have changed societies. And so not to lose hope, but also to take care of ourselves and to prepare so that whenever action is needed, we would be there.
Andrea, can I offer an antidote? And that would be to work as hard as you can between now and 8 o'clock on Tuesday evening to make sure that scenario does not happen.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I think the greatest movement that has already started is the early voting and the people going to the polls in record numbers. And I think that's already very heartening, and to continue to do that and absolutely give it our all on Tuesday.
Here's an interesting question. I'm a Black woman boomer, and my biggest fears are Trump winning a second term and Americans who voted for him and see him as an appropriate leader for this country. More fearful of the latter because they'll still be around even if he loses. I completely don't understand them, and I'm afraid of what they'll do after the election.
Great question.
Yes. The immediate aftermath is a bit of a risk, given that many of them are essentially loyalists who are willing to risk their lives for this president. But many people ask me, what can we tell them, or how can we persuade them to not support this president so this president can be removed or voted out? My response is usually that it's the other way around. Once the president is removed from an influential office and does not have as much exposure to the public, then a lot of his followership will dissipate. And that is partly because he is maintaining a kind of shared psychology, shared symptoms, actually, including symptoms that are often shared and induced in others include delusions, paranoia, and violence proneness. And so when the exposure is gone, these symptoms we can expect to rapidly dissipate. In fact, we've observed that happening a couple times, especially at the start of the pandemic, when he was no longer able to hold rallies. There was a period when his poll numbers dropped pretty notably, and that was because of the lack of exposure.
Bandy, if I can follow up on that, Andrea, even if he loses in a huge way, don't you think that he is going to be so desperate for that lifeline of approval and love that he's become used to over the past 4 years and addicted to, that he will not go quietly into the night? I mean, he still will have access to his Twitter thumbs. And
yes, absolutely.
This white grievance that he has escalated, he'll be on every 3 minutes talking about how Joe Biden and the Democrats stole the election from him. And won't that make his loyal supporters, maybe even half or 2/3 of what he has now, even more enraged, because he will have become a martyr, a living martyr?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's not so much his removal from the office that is important as much as removal of exposure. And so, yes, he will continue to try to gain attention for himself and have as much exposure as possible. So that is really when both the media and the people have to decide that this is not a healthy arrangement for the population. In fact, it has been psychologically extraordinarily destructive. And so to reduce exposure to this kind of pathology, because unlike healthy engagements or healthy influence, the influence of severe mental symptoms actually usurp your reasoning. They can also take over your personality. You come to carry symptoms that would appear as if you have the same illness as the person who is influencing you. And so that's why it's very important to reduce exposure. Of course, that's not the end of the story. You also have to reduce propaganda and cultic programming that induce, that facilitate disordered thinking, conspiracy theories. These actually resonate with feelings of paranoia or delusions of persecution. And so they augment frank mental disorder in addition to giving false information.
Yeah.
And then finally, the conditions of society need to change, the conditions that gave rise to the current predicament. And that is actually the extreme inequality that we're experiencing in this country right now. Relative poverty is psychologically far more injurious than absolute poverty. And so even as a country being relatively well off, if those around you are doing well and you are not, that is actually far more psychologically devastating and has probably created the vulnerability to someone like Donald Trump.
Wow, that's brilliant. I just have to say, good luck stopping Fox News and QAnon from continuing to blast out misinformation and incendiary information. So I think we're going to need your guidance for a little while to come. Andrea?
Yeah, so on this same note, how do we forgive Republican senators or even our Republican friends and family members, not that I have any right now, for if, period, not only if he wins, but if he loses. The question is, how do we forgive Republican senators or even Republican friends and family?
I think as far as senators or those in authority positions go, I think we need to hold them accountable. I don't think forgiveness is the right avenue because many of them are actually showing signs of mental compromise that allow them to recklessly pursue their own interests at the expense of the people, the nation. And many have actually mentioned, whenever I bring up the subject of mental fitness for duty exams for presidential and vice presidential candidates, people always ask, what about Congress members? So I think some kind of screening, some kind of standards for our lawmakers would be important. In any other position, such as be it a scientist or even a lawyer, if one had such conflicts of interest, one would be disqualified for their position. But unfortunately for politicians, the conflicts are almost a requirement. And so how can one do one's job with so many conflicts of interest? And also, how do we ferret out those who are mentally compromised? And that is a serious question we have come to ask, given the behavior of especially Republican senators and even Supreme Court appointees. So more and more positions are requiring fitness for duty exams. Why not the highest, most important positions?
So,
and Andrea, I just have one solution there. There are 23 incumbent Republican senators, all of whom voted against the conviction of Donald Trump. 23 Republican Senate enablers who are up for re-election. If we flip 4 of those 23, they no longer have any power in the United States Senate.
That's great.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, I just realized I didn't finish answering your question. What do we do about our family and friends? The ordinary person who has been taken in by Donald Trump's ideology is actually has done so against their own interests and against their own benefit or even self-care. And many relationships have ruptured. This is rather tragic situation. When people ask me, how do we persuade Trump supporters? How do we talk to them? I generally say, you don't really talk to them about those issues. Basically, presenting them with evidence or facts will only arouse resistance because they already know what is true deep down. It's that they have been conditioned to reject this and to double down and to deny. And so you have to address the original conditions that brought them to this place in the first place. And some of the conditions are the ones I described, but also just having them as friends or allies. You can just treat them humanely and give them a place to go, friendship or home to return to, regardless of what they have done. And they would more readily turn around. It's the fear that they would have no place to go that is making them pretty much feel they're held hostage.
So in this is a question that directly dovetails your answer. This is a question that came in today. What's the deal with the Republicans in Congress from a sociopathological or psychological standpoint to stand for this? There must be more to their staying in line than just about how they're afraid of his tweets or possible blackmail. Is there some collective psychosis going on with Republicans in Congress?
Yes, I think that reflects a general trend over decades where rather than address issues in society, they have chosen actually to manipulate the minds of their constituents. So using psychological techniques derived from advertising, from public relations. So it's actually been a campaign that's been happening for decades, pretty much in concert with Fox News and I guess Open America Network, the new program, and
OAN.
Bright.
Yeah.
Yes, and these media outlets that are actually promoting misinformation as news. So they're actually, in a sense, reforming the thoughts of those who are listening and viewing. And so this is actually psychologically very harmful and a matter in which mental health professionals really should become involved, because the mind is powerful, and the techniques that we have to work with the mind are also powerful. To repeatedly, continuously have harmful influences to the public in order to buttress a certain party's power or to sell products, whereas those who would use that knowledge for greater good are silenced. Andrea, you earlier mentioned how I ruffled the feathers of the American Psychiatric Association, but I have actually started speaking up because I saw their motion to be deliberately extraordinarily harmful to the public. And I think we see the results. When they came out with the new gag order at the start of this presidency, in other words, March of 2017, they took an obscure, basically a rule that no one ever cared for, no one studied and didn't matter since the 1960s, the Goldwater rule, and changed it to cover not just refraining from diagnosis, but being prohibited from any comment regarding any objectively observable behavior or speech or affect of a public figure. To me, that is protecting a public figure or a political person, and a very particular political person, at the expense of public health. And psychiatry was never meant to be this way. We have a responsibility to society as well as to patients. They say in the first line of their code of ethics. And so we do need to get more involved. We have a mental health crisis, a pandemic, at the same time as a viral pandemic. And to silence expert voices is to essentially hand over the public to a deadly disease. And even the viral pandemic wouldn't be so bad if there weren't a mental health pandemic at the same time.
Here's an interesting question. Donald Trump is triggering for me. My dad is a narcissist who was also a Trump supporter. When I hear Donald Trump speak, it reminds me of my lifetime of dealing with my dad, and consequently my anger at Trump gets misdirected at my dad. Are there some good tools to help me separate Trump from my dad in my head?
Wow.
Yes. There's no therapist in the country who has not experienced an extraordinary jump. No therapist I've talked to who has not experienced a huge jump in increase of symptoms, especially re-traumatization of symptoms of from abuse, from mistreatment. And that is the effect of having an abusive personality in a powerful office. And so it's the person is very right to feel what they're feeling, and it's shared across the board. Those who have had symptoms have seen an increase in symptoms. Those without have seen a new onset of symptoms. And so the nation has reached record levels of stress and anxiety since the start of the presidency. And so that is where self-care becomes important once again, far from being self-indulgent or irrelevant. It's actually the primary thing that should be on our minds. In fact, when I teach law students or medical students and they're about to work in the emergency room or go defend a case, I usually tell them, well, in an emergency, first check your own pulse. And that means that first we need to take care of ourselves. So do what you need, disengage from the news, engage in hobbies, give yourself the time and distance so that you can be renewed. And that's not really a cop-out. That's actually part of a soldier's training, as Mohandas Gandhi has said, of nonviolent movements by people, that we do this kind of spiritual training. We bring ourselves back to balance, and we first take care of ourselves so that when the time arises, we will be available.
Here's another, there are so many great ones. When I'm no longer shocked at what I read in the news, I feel like we're normalizing evil, to use a term I read about in your book. I believe it was the first book, because I remember reading about normalizing evil too. I understand that self-preservation requires adaptation and numbness, but is there a way to balance adaptation with activism? That's a good question.
Yes, absolutely. Activism is actually a great antidote. Well, part of the normalization of evil, and I would say actually evil would be a combination of criminal mindedness and mental pathology, because most people think of those things as being mutually exclusive. But when they actually occur together, all kinds of atrocities become possible. So that's what I believe is the situation today, especially when we have mental pathology as part of the picture, then people's sense of reality is distorted. So pathology is normalized, and normal is relegated to strangeness. And in that environment, what can we do? We can not lose our balance by continually stating the truth, by seeking out fellowship with those who can share our vision and our values. And also, this is where facts and knowledge matter, and experts matter. Experts of all fields can be witnessing professionals to help bring us back to reality, because often when you have a two-party system, it seems that the two sides ought to be equal, but experts may tell you otherwise. I've done a study of homicides and suicides, for example, of the two parties, and over a period of 110 years, Republicans have consistently doubled violent death rates, whereas Democrats have consistently halved them over their presidential terms. And so I think that's enough to say that it's a difference of life and death, not just party.
What explains, Bandy, come back. You look frozen. Okay.
By the way, Andrea, before you jump to the next question, I have never heard that statistic. That is stunning, that there is such a huge mathematical difference between the effect, the impact that a Republican and a Democratic administration have. Bandy, can you say something a little more about that? Because that is stunning.
Bandy went away.
Come back, Bandy, we still need you.
Yeah, because I can't answer that question.
No, I understand, but while we're waiting.
That's above my pay grade. Here she is. Richard just asked you a question. Can Richard ask it again?
Yeah, Bandy, I had never heard that statistic, and I've been in politics for 50 years. Could you go a little deeper into that? You're saying that a Democratic administration versus a Republican administration has a profoundly mathematically significant difference in terms of the impact on the societies that they run.
Richard, unmute her.
Okay. Okay, hold on. I don't know how to do that. No, here she goes. Bandy? Bandy, can you unmute yourself?
Hi.
Okay, good.
Are we okay now? Sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
It was such an important question. We've now asked it twice. So did you hear?
Yes, I heard the question. I heard you. Okay. You couldn't hear me. I personally didn't wish to do this study. It was my mentor, the renowned violence expert, Dr. James Gilligan, who insisted that we look at political party as a variable to violent death rates. And so I thought it would somehow cancel out by unemployment rates or GDP or some other policy difference, not just party difference. But astonishingly, the results were hugely significant. Not only a difference of small degree that was statistically significant, but as I said, the exact opposite direction by the same degree. So in other words, because parties have alternated, we have not really noticed, but whenever a Republican administration was in power, they were essentially doubling violent death rates, suicides and homicides, and handing over the higher levels to Democratic administrations that would then have them. And this is without almost any exception, except two, and the two were explainable by essentially how much the other party played a role in their policies.
Can you share that study? Is that a public study?
Yes, it's been published, and it was before the Trump administration, so we weren't really influenced by our notions of the party now. And strikingly, it's been consistent for 110 years.
Can you explain why?
So because we used many other variables to try to explain the party difference, but we kept coming back to a powerful party difference that has nothing to do with policy. So apparently it's their rhetoric. And I do believe that the harmful effects on the public psychology and their ability to perceive what needs addressing and what is wrong, when that is subverted to the opposite, then people will be driving themselves to their own destruction, because they're constantly not only voting against their own interests, but opting for the wrong solution for the problem.
If I can just insert on a current political conversation, just the constant lock him up or lock her up, right? I mean, that is a call to violence, not to mention stand back and stand by, right? I mean, just within the last, like almost every day on TV from one party, we're hearing very incendiary language. And I'm amazed that we have a study, and I can't wait to get my hands on it. Andrea?
Yes, and also the constant fear, the arousing of fear among the population, even when protests, Black Lives Matter protests, are 93% peaceful or 97% peaceful in some places, to dub them as being violent and a menace to everyone. That kind of fear mongering can also play an influence, but I will add the caveat that we actually don't know what is causing the difference in deaths. That would be for further study.
Okay.
Here's another one. Trump lies constantly. The Washington Post counts the lies in the tens of thousands. Does he believe his own lies? What makes him do this? I guess that's the real crux of the question. And how do his supporters tolerate it? If their attorney or work colleague lied like he does, there would be hell to pay. So how can his followers tolerate his constant lying?
Great question.
So whether or not he believes in them, whether they are manipulative lies or delusions, this level of lying is pathological regardless. And there are indications that he does believe many of his lies, and the lies fit patterns of wishing to convince himself, and indeed succeeding at convincing himself, rather than just presenting a certain facade or a strategy. What makes it more likely that these are delusions is from his influence on the public. His fixed false beliefs are transmitted to the population, and delusions, as we know, are more transmittable than simply false beliefs.
How is that? Can you explain that?
It's usually because of the emotional drive behind it. When mental pathology and symptoms are driven by emotion rather than logic or reason, and the way that they in fact take over and dominate is through the emotional drive and need to believe, the intolerance of reality, and the absolute desperation to believe that one is the best and better than all the experts and the only one who could fix things, who is never wrong and never needs to take responsibility because everything was done well. I mean, that kind of detachment from reality often comes from the emotional need that makes that necessary. So the way that mental symptoms are transmitted is through emotional bonds. And so when people are bonded to him, they are more likely to catch his symptoms, so to speak.
So this goes
Wow.
straight into another question, and you've touched on part of it. My mom is 70. She's always been a Republican. She doesn't consume much news and refuses to discuss politics. When I try to tell her about the damage this administration and the GOP are doing and the dire situation we're in, even using personal examples, she gets upset. She just says, "You're not going to change my mind." Being dismissed like this is painful and her attitude is infuriating. Does she have some kind of, I think there's something in that about the dismissal. But the question is, does she have some kind of stunted mental development? I guess that dovetails right in what you were talking about.
Yes, so previously healthy individuals will come to adopt symptoms that make them look like they have the primary illness that the person spreading the symptoms is suffering from. In other words, over time, they look alike. And it's almost hard to tell who was the primary person with the symptoms to begin with. But the difference is the primary person is treated sometimes with medication. They're treated in their own right. For the secondary person, the treatment is separation from exposure. So so that's why it's important to figure out from the course of things whether or not symptoms were induced or whether they were primary illnesses. And this is actually a phenomenon I've seen a lot because I work in prison settings and state hospital settings where severely ill individuals go untreated for a long time. And over time, all family members adopt even bizarre beliefs and delusions and symptoms, even sometimes hallucinations. And the cure of it is to remove the person. Once you hospitalize the primary person with the illness, the others return to their normal state. And it's quite dramatic how that happens. But until then, you can see from the rigidity, the inflexibility in terms of not being able to take in more new information or facts, an inability to negotiate, that these are actually symptoms and not the person's chosen stance.
Bandy, if I can just ask, just to clarify, because I think this is a really powerful concept. You are saying that Donald Trump's pathological narcissism is in fact transmissible and contagious in some ways, just like COVID.
Yes, exactly. That's the phenomenon that I've been trying to warn against. Unfortunately, it's been called various things and no name is really perfect, but it can be called induced delusions or shared psychosis, or I actually prefer the French phrase, folie à millions. So when it happens among millions, there's a name for it, madness among millions, folie à millions. But it's usually seen in pairs, in threes, folie à deux, folie à trois, or folie à famille when it happens in a family, or folie à groupe, it can happen within a gang. But now we are seeing it happen with the nation. Yes, it's the same phenomenon.
Is this progressive? One second. Is this pathology progressive, Bandy?
Yes.
Will it get worse over the next 4 years?
Yes. We've seen it worsen over 4 years. We see Trump supporters, rather than recognizing how he has been fooling them and how he's not the successful businessman he led them to believe he is, they have actually doubled down in their support for him and have even gone to extents that they would not have gone to, and to defend him and support him. And you see them conforming more and more, so they're giving up their personalities and their own agencies to basically do what he says.
So if he loses, what happens to QAnon then in terms of this Foley group? I mean, you talk about it a little bit in Trump's Mind, America's Soul, but what happens, does QAnon dissipate or not?
Yes, it should dissipate. It probably won't disappear. It has its own independent existence, of course. But the reason why all these fringe beliefs are becoming more central is because of Donald Trump's psychology, that he himself requires extreme conspiracy theories in order to explain how people are not liking him and criticizing him. And he has to create a story, a narrative of deep state persecuting him in order to keep himself right and sane and capable, when in fact he's not.
Here's a question on, I guess we're going back again to the balance of activism and,
Panic.
Well,
Overwhelm.
So, and what to do? I mean, just what to do. So there exists the strong possibility that a combination of federal and state court rulings and or elected officials stopping the counting or certification of legally submitted votes so as to influence or even change the outcomes of various races. My question is, how should we react to these unacceptable scenarios?
So constantly he's going to try to subvert institutions, the law, and norms, and reality itself in order to place himself at the top. So our job is to continually affirm the truth, affirm reality, and keep with norms and laws, and pressure prosecutors to prosecute the law. In the absence of clear removal and protection from presidential powers at this point, the best we can do is to set limits, to try to psychologically contain him, and to place pressure, and the people can do that.
Can you explain the difference between the occult and this folie million, or the delusions of millions and occult?
The two often occur together. Occult is a very defined setting where the members are inculcated and they're led to worship a leader figure. Folie à million happens with severe mental pathology, and the transmission is kind of naturally occurring. It comes with exposure, but you don't particularly need programming, but it happens over time with the extent of exposure. So the two work in tandem, and so are very dangerous. And there are cultic aspects to Donald Trump's reign.
Richard, it's 6:30, and or 6:30 Pacific time, because we have people from all over the country joining us tonight. Richard, make this end on a nice, happy note, okay? Bandy.
First of all, I think we need a huge applause for Bandy. I mean, that was a master class in what has been going on inside of our own psyches, our own hearts, and our own country. And Bandy, so eloquent, and you are a real courageous hero to share this. And I know you've been blacklisted and you've been kicked off TV shows, and the mainstream media has not been willing to have this come to Jesus conversation, which we should have had more than 4 years ago. So this pathologically incapable man would not even be in that position. So let's all give a little hand to Bandy.
Well, that's so kind, Richard. But let me return the compliment. As you mentioned early on, it was your article citing my old colleague, Dr. Judith Herman, with whom I had been out of touch for 15 years, that got me back in touch with her. And that's how we did the conference at Yale and decided to put the book together. And well, the good news is that what everyone is seeing is what is real. And thousands of mental health professionals have come forth to affirm this. And we have one reason why our voice has been squelched so early on is because we are correct. And so no matter what kind of subversion of institution, of our notion of reality, it still does not change the truth and the power of truth. Right?
Yes.
We can depend on that and be strengthened by that.
And thank you. And Andrea, to answer your question and to end this on some good news, we are one man in the White House away from changing the energy, the consciousness, the conversation in this country. And we are 4 United States senators away from reducing Donald Trump's Senate enablers to a position of zero power, because I believe we will, in fact, nuke the filibuster. There are 47 Democrats, 53 Republicans. 23 of those 53 are up for re-election. As I said before, all we have to do is to get people to take that emotion, that energy, that fear, that passion, and show up, and to get the 90 to 100 million Americans who are not likely to vote to actually do that. And we can create a landslide against Donald Trump and a landslide against pathology and Trumpism. And then maybe we can get back to that more healthy country that we're talking about when Democrats, in fact, take over.
Right. Dr. Bandy Lee, thank you so much. This book, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, it's really fascinating, and it's so accessible and so terrific. I want to thank you. And even though you were kicked off TV shows, Writer's Block is always here, and we don't have commercials, so there you go. Richard, thank you so much. It was so fun working with you. And we'll see you all soon. This is our last program before the election. And after the election, we're going to do some fiction, I think. It's time for some fiction.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Richard, so good to be here.
Thank you. See you all soon.
Thank you, Andrea.
Bye-bye.